the next one. That's also very interesting. When we all talk about innovation, right, we need to know how innovativeness is there in really that innovation. And how do you gauge that? How do you measure that? Especially in the times when we all know about this innovation, we talk about innovation, but how effective that innovation is going to be. And is it really innovative enough? We're talking about innovations in products or process or business models. Here we have a very eminent speaker amongst us to talk on that. I invite Ranjan Malik for talking on that. I'll give a brief introduction about him. Ranjan is co-founder and managing partner of Primalise and is an innovation specialist, speaker and writer. As we were speaking before the session started, he has a rich background and experience in the world of advertisement as well, with a lot of things that he has done in that world. So thanks for being, Ranjan, being with us here. He created the STORM, the norm method for innovation and Primalise approach to ecosystem innovation and design. And it'll be so nice to hear from him on that. Welcome, Ranjan. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Namaskar. Right, so we have 20 minutes and we need to talk. We are talking about the essentials of, so you can start the counter. Will you start it? So we'll talk about essentials of innovation. We'll also talk about, a whole lot of times people look at innovation and wonder if there is a method to this magic of innovation. Are there ways one can even measure how do you decide what's more innovative and what's less innovative? There was a time when I got involved with Innovation Awards. This was many years ago. I remember there was this, Innovation for India Awards were being set up, and so we were looking around for methodologies that were objective enough that could help us take decisions. As innovation jury, you need to take very strange decisions. You need to sometimes take a decision between, is this more innovative or is the pen more innovative? So both both products have been have applied, or organizations have applied for innovation awards, but you can give the award to one. How do you decide? How do you take an objective decision? Now, is it just subjective decision of certain jury members, or can one objectively take decisions when it comes to innovation? So, so we'll talk about all that. So let's begin. What do you see here? What do you see here? What kind of map? Inverted. When we give a printout of a map like this to people, they instinctively turn it around. And when they turn it around, they see that the words are now upside down, and they say, there's something wrong with the map. And they give it back to you, saying, there's something, your map is odd. What are maps? Maps are just information. They tell you which country is where, how big, et cetera, et cetera. But after a while, maps can become mindsets. They can become mental models. For us, there is a certain kind of world map we've grown up with. The kind of world map that we saw in our geography books, in our atlases. And today, when we see a map that looks different, because it doesn't fit with our schema, our mental model, we find it odd and we reject it. There's nothing wrong with this map. We're just standing on the North Pole and looking down. It's a different perspective. Where did we find this map? We found it in an Australian atlas. And there was something very interesting written under the map in small print. I'm going to read that out for you, and you'll know the kind of mindset we're talking about here, when we become slaves of our own mental models. It said, no apologies are called for in presenting the map with south at the top. After hundreds of years of development, the southern lands have no reason to be under the northern hemisphere. A very rebellious thought, a very irreverent thought. Saying that there's nothing wrong in a world that looks like this. Indeed, there isn't. And obviously, Australians love it. And they don't like the world calling them down under or down south. And what's wrong with a world that looks like this, that places them right on top? So what happens is that we all live in a paradigm. You know, it's very strange. I mean, let me tell you a children's story when we try and understand how we become slaves of the norms that we live within. There's a pond, and a typical ecosystem, has plants and animals and all those things that live in a pond. So there are these frogs that every once in a while they jump out of the pond and they do what they do. They just jump around and look around, and then they go back into the pond. And they come back with a lot of interesting, fascinating stories of the world outside the pond. And the animals that can't go out of the pond, the fish, for example, listen to these frogs and their stories with rapt attention. Say, wow, that must be a fascinating world out there. And usually the frogs start their stories with, you know, when we go out of water, we see this, we see that, we see trees, we see animals, we see birds, we see human beings, we see a whole lot of stuff. Now, this goes on for some time, and you know, one day a baby fish asks a very interesting question. A baby fish which hasn't been normed yet. Says, frog, when you go out of water, you see a whole lot of stuff out there, but what's water? Now, the frogs don't know how to tell fish what water is. How do you tell fish what water is? You know, an animal that was born in water, will live in water, will die in water. If there was a PhD in water, that should be the fish, right? But that's where the frogs realized something very interesting. That in order to understand water completely, you sure need to know water, but you also need to know water. An outside-in perspective. So the question we usually ask is it possible to make sense of your paradigm completely from within it? That's just partial perspective. And typically when we work with organizations, I'm an innovation facilitator, the question we ask is, if you're a fish, what's your water? Every client, if you're a fish, what's your water? What's everywhere, is all pervasive, is critical for your existence, but you don't notice it. You don't notice it, like fish doesn't notice water. But an outsider will come in and will see it. You know, usually these stormers, there's a book in the market called Storm the Norm, and we actually studied organizations that have stormed the norms of their industry and have created unprecedented vibrancy. You know, usually an industry what you see in an industry is more of the same things. People follow the same usual norms. And every once in a while, a stormer comes in and challenges the current paradigms, the current ways of working in that industry, and creates a step change. A whole lot of times, these stormers come from outside. And often, incumbents become stormers. Why do they come from outside? Because the norm, you know, the incumbents have gotten normed. They've started taking things too for granted. And outsiders are able to see what insiders really can't. So when it comes to innovation, every time we see a step change happen, we know that a mental model has shifted. You know, when you make a change in your product, you tweak it, there is a proportionate benefit you get out of it. The deeper shift you make of the suboptimal that you see in your ecosystem, the more disproportionate the impact is. Now, let's try and understand how one can measure innovation. Now, if you go back to the history of innovation, there are really different kinds of innovation we are talking about here. This is a schematic of your ecosystem where you exist. This is the consumer. That's you. This is your consumer. These are the partners who help you do your business well. These are the competitors who keep you on your toes, and therefore, they are responsible for you innovating, really. And then that's the big brother, the regulator. When you look at the history of innovation, this was what innovation was. You know, we were talking about the time when innovation really became a buzzword. Innovation was product innovation, and product innovation was innovation. Organizations that really, so what you saw was organizations that had huge R&D who worked. This is during the industrial age when you actually created innovative products that changed your industry. Now, as the world went along, we realized that there was a different kind of product out there too. Not all products are touchy-feely, tangible things. Even service is product too. If a bank comes out with a new mutual fund product, it's a mutual fund product. Or hospitality industry comes out with a new service, it's a product. So in order to incorporate that, which was service innovation, we called it offering innovation. So this was one kind of innovation that we talk about. As the world moved along, we realized, until now, the definition of innovation was anything that touches the customer directly and creates new value for the customer is innovation. Now, when we saw, as we moved along, we realized there were some things happening in the ecosystem which were not touching the customer directly, but were generating new value for the system, and some of it reached the customer too. So say, for example, if I change my manufacturing process, if I change my supply chain process, that generates new value. So that's process innovation. The next era of innovation really belonged to process innovation, where there was a lot of optimization innovation that began to happen. As we went along, we realized there were organizations, if you remember what Dell did, they said the same product, but I've changed my business model. And because I've changed my business model, I've generated new value, and some of it I'll pass on to you. So business model innovation became the next big thing. In fact, this was a watershed moment in the history of innovation, if you see. This was a time when organizations that had, if you look at countries like ours, when I was growing up as a student, I remember we would read in journals which would say, US is 50 years ahead of India, or Japan is so many years ahead of India. This brought everyone back to ab initio, because we realized that business model innovation was far less capital intensive. We could just play around with the building blocks of your business model, and you could generate value or unlock new value. Look at what India did with IT. Business model innovation became the next big thing. Now, when we go to innovation conferences, there's a fourth kind of innovation that everyone is talking about, although there's no word that everyone has agreed on as to what to call it. What would be beyond product, process, and business model? Anyone? So data, okay. Any other thoughts? What? Platform. Any other thoughts? So when your innovation benefits not just you and your value chain, but goes beyond it, what would you call it? For want of any better word, we call it ecosystem innovation. So when you actually end up re-architecting the innovation, your ecosystem, the new kinds of entities that we see in the market today, the aggregators, the platforms, or the orchestrators are really ecosystem innovators today. So therefore, there are four kinds of innovations we look at. Even in innovation awards, when we are trying to measure and evaluate innovation, there are these four kinds of categories these days that you see: product innovation, process innovation, business model innovation, and ecosystem innovation. This is an interesting story from, this is about Walt Disney. The first movie, animation film that they created, this was in 1930s. It was a 20-minute animation, and this film, it was called The Three Little Pigs. Sometimes your product becomes a big success, bigger success than you anticipated. So this is what happened with this film. This film became a huge success, and the team said, what happens in Hollywood and Bollywood when a film becomes a big success, surprise success? Sequels begin to happen, or repeats, because the industry seems to have found a new formula for success. The team sat down together and said, what should the next film be? What do you think the next film was? It was a pig film. And the team sat down and said, and this film, if you go to their website, you'll see they made not one, but 3 sequels after that. All of them failed. Walt Disney was alive that time, and he writes about this phase in life in his autobiography. If you find his autobiography somewhere, do read this section. He says that, and by this time he was, they were wondering what's going wrong. Every film failed. And every time the film failed, every subsequent film was a bigger film, much better in terms of more money, more technology, maybe more pigs, but nothing worked. Because every time they said, The market wants pigs. Maybe we're not giving it to them in the right manner. So he was taking a morning walk, and suddenly a realization, an epiphany happened to him, and he rushed back to his office. And this is what he said. In fact, if you Google this statement, you'll find that story. You can't top pigs with pigs. What he was trying to say was that you need to do something very, very different. We need to go beyond making pig films. Now, what he was, although it sounded very simple, but what he was saying was very profound. He said, we are exploring like a curious child as long as we are failing. If this didn't work, what else will work? What else will work? What else will work? But we do that only till we succeed. Because the moment we succeed, the discourse in the head changes. We start saying, this is the only way to succeed. So our success traps us far more than failure ever can. Our success traps us because we become trapped in our own mental models. So the team sat down together, and the next film they thought up was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was a huge film. It was a blockbuster. It actually held the record of a top grosser for many years. It was a full-length animation film. Now, while Walt Disney learned this lesson very well, look at the world we live in. We live in a world that has amazing number of products, more of the same, and every once in a while, some innovation comes in. It's not just about products, it's about also strategies and even business models. After a while, they all become pigs. Therefore, how do you, in a world like this, measure innovation? Now, there are two areas where we look at measuring innovation. One is after the impact, and the second is before the impact. Now, when a VC is looking at a potential, is looking at a pitch and saying, will this be a big business? You're actually looking at the promise or potential of big business and trying and measuring it to see, will it make sense for me to invest in it? Or you could be looking at organizations that have done something and you are measuring impact post the fact, which is after impact. Now, let's look at both. Usually, these are the parameters we look at when measuring innovation. Impact and uniqueness. These are the two more basic or critical parameters we look at. If it is just impact and no uniqueness, it's not innovation. It's just successful business. So impact and uniqueness, these are the two key parameters. We also look at three other parameters, usually as when we are in a dilemma whether this is bigger or that is bigger. These other three are leverage, sustainability, and scalability. Now, let me talk about each of these quickly in 3 slides. Typically, impact these days, we look at the triple bottom line. We look at profits, people, and planet. So what has been the economic impact of a certain innovation? What has been the direct economic impact of the innovation on the company or on the industry? So typically, look at this as a scale. We look at from 0 to 5. We try and measure what the impact could be. Second is social impact. How has the innovation impacted the lives of customers or employees and other people that it has touched? So economic impact, social impact, which is people, and environmental impact, which is planet, as we say. Environmental impact, what impact, positive or negative, has the innovation had on the physical environment, or whatever. So impact, looked at it, we look at it in these 3 ways. Uniqueness. How transformative has the innovation been? Has it been a manifestation or solution level shift? Has it been a track of thinking level shift? Or has it been a mental model level shift? The deeper the shift, the more disproportionate the impact. So there is a whole science to it as to how do you go deeper and see if this innovation is just a product level shift or a mental model level shift. We are talking about blockchains, for example. Now, blockchain in banking industry is a mental model level shift. It's a deeper level shift. Now, let's look at, for example, okay, let's stay with banking. Many years ago, banks computerized. PSU banks were the first ones that computerized. What they did was they merely replaced the files with computers, right? Now, that was a solution level shift. The track level and mental model, they were following the same old processes of banking. They only replaced files with computers. That was a surface level shift. Many years later, someone took banking, telecom, and IT, combined it, and created ATM. Now, that was a thinking track or frame level shift, slightly deeper level shift. That creates a bigger impact. Now, when you go deeper and you ask yourself, what is the most fundamental truth on which this industry sits? You reach the mental model level. So that's where blockchain sits, for example, where we say, rather than central ledger, distributed ledger. So suddenly you reach, so very little time for that, but you actually look at uniqueness at these 2-3 levels. Leverage is the resource-result ratio that we usually look at. The question we ask is, usually we say, for example, in our business, input-output ratio. Typically we say, jitna gud daloge, utna meetha hoga. These are the kind of resources needed for this kind of an impact. What if I say, has my innovation found a new ratio, which is using less than usual resources, I've created higher than usual impact. If I've altered the ratio, I've altered leverage. So that is another key parameter we look at when we measure innovation. For innovations that are potential and that show promise, that haven't shown impact yet, these are the 3 areas we look at: concept, champion, and context. Concept is the same: impact, uniqueness, and leverage. I won't go into details there. Very, very important to look at the champion, the person who's driving that innovation. If you know that VCs place more weightage on team rather than the concept, they know that even if the current concept fails, this team is going to go out and maybe rethink the concept and still succeed. So champion is a very important one. We put a lot of weight there, and context. Now, this champion has come with this concept from a certain context. This is where he's going to launch this product. Now, is that context enabling or disabling? We look at economic context, social context, political context, and environmental context. Very important to look at whether you could have an amazing concept and a person who's really excited about it, but he comes from a context which is disabling. So we keep that also into mind to see if the innovation is going to succeed or not. I'll just jump through these. I just spoke about this: solution level, track level, and mental model level. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ranjan. And I'm sorry I had to kind of come in. Any questions if you have, he'll be very happy to interact offline. It was obviously very, very informative talk by him. And I'm sure he has a lot to share. So please do not miss the opportunity to talk to him. Especially when we talk about innovation, we often miss the opportunity, or we do not know how to measure the innovation. So I think we all must really grab that opportunity to understand that from him. Thank you so much, Ranjanji. And I see Deepthi sitting there. Deepthi, please come over and hand over the memento to Ranjanji, please. Please come.
I think I managed the time very badly. I had a whole lot of slides, and I realized...
you have a lot of things to share, I'm sure, and this is wealth of information for everyone. Please come. Yeah, please come.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepthi. Thank you.